Hey, before anything else, before the story, before the archive footage, before I tell you what happened in the desert that April night in 1964, I want to know one thing about you. Where in the world are you watching this right now? Drop your city, your country. Right down there in the comments. I genuinely read every single one. Everyone. People watching from places I have never even heard of. And I love that. So go ahead. Tell me where you are. And while you are down there, what time is it where you are right now? Morning? Middle of the night? Just tell me. Simple. What time is it on your end? I am curious. Today's like goal is just 10. That is it. 10 likes. If you have already hit that button, thank you. That is real support. And if you have not yet, you can do it anytime. No pressure. If you are new here and you like stories that actually happened, documented, on the record, sworn testimony, hit subscribe. That is what we do here. Now, let's go back to New Mexico, April 24th, 1964, and a moment that has never been fully explained. It is 5:45 in the afternoon. The desert is doing what deserts do in late April, stretching out in every direction, flat and indifferent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. A police patrol car sits at the side of a dirt road outside Socorro, New Mexico. The officer inside is a veteran. He has worked this beat for years. He knows this land. He knows what belongs here. And then something roars. Not a car, not a plane, not anything he has heard in 20 years of law enforcement in this part of the Southwest. A roar that drops in pitch as it descends. As if something very large is landing, not crashing. Landing, deliberately, precisely. He drives toward it. What he finds in that Arroyo, that dry gully carved by years of flash floods and hard sun, is something that will be investigated by federal agencies, corroborated by independent witnesses, photographed on the ground, and debated by serious researchers for the next 60 years. So, what did he actually see? Socorro, New Mexico, population around 6,000 in 1964. A quiet desert town south of Albuquerque, sitting at nearly 4,600 feet elevation, surrounded by the Chihuahuan Desert scrubland and the San Mateo Mountains to the west. The sort of place where everybody knows everybody, where the police department is small, and the officers who work it are known by their neighbors, judged daily on their character. Lonnie Zamora was 31 years old on April 24, 1964. He held the rank of patrolman with the Socorro Police Department, where he had served since 1960. He was known locally as a serious, no-nonsense officer. His sergeant, Sam Chavez, described him as one of the most reliable men on the force. He had no history of fabrication, no record of erratic behavior, and no known interest in what would then have been called flying saucer stories. The afternoon of April 24th had been ordinary right up until 5:45 p.m. Zamora was in his patrol car pursuing a speeding vehicle south of town on US Route 85 when he heard an enormous roar to his southwest and saw a blue-orange flame descend from the sky, low, angled, heading toward an area of gullies and rock outcroppings about a mile off the road. His first assumption, and he radioed this immediately, was that a dynamite shack he knew to be in the area had exploded. He broke off the pursuit and turned toward the flame. The terrain between the road and the gully is rough. Loose soil, steep banks, juniper scrub. It took Zamora 3 attempts to get his car up the incline. He crested the ridge at 5:50 p.m. and stopped. What he saw in that Arroyo was not a dynamite shack, and it was not anything he had a name for, but it was the emblem on its surface, a marking he would draw for federal investigators within hours, that became one of the most documented and analyzed symbols in the history of unexplained aerial phenomena. Lonnie Zamora gave his official written statement to the Socorro Police Department and to Special Agent D. Arthur Burns, Jr. of the FBI's Albuquerque field office on the same evening it happened. That statement, now declassified and available through the FBI's online vault, is the foundation of everything that follows. In it, Zamora described what he saw the moment he came over the ridge. In a gully approximately 150 to 200 yards to his south was an object. He initially thought it was an overturned car, a white or aluminum-colored vehicle, oval in shape, sitting low to the ground on 4 legs. Standing beside it, he wrote, were two figures, small, dressed in what appeared to be white coveralls. They were near the object and appeared startled when he came over the ridge. One of them looked directly at him. He later told investigators, and these are the words recorded in the FBI field report, that the figures were not like any people he had seen on a worksite. He said they were child-sized or possibly smaller. He radioed dispatch at 5:45 p.m., reported a possible accident, and began to drive toward the site. As he approached on foot after parking his car on the ridge, the figures were no longer visible. The object itself was still there. It was oval, it was smooth. It had no windows, no visible propulsion system, no markings he could identify, except one. On the lower section of the craft's surface, Zamora saw a symbol, a red marking. He described it as an arc, like an inverted V, with a horizontal line beneath it and a vertical line above, forming something that looked like a sign, not a letter, not a number, but deliberate, intentional, something placed there by someone who had a reason to place it. He stood approximately 50 feet from the object when the roaring sound returned, low, then escalating, and the blue-orange flame reappeared from beneath it. The craft rose, slowly at first, then faster. It moved horizontally over the desert, gaining altitude, and within seconds was gone to the southwest. The entire sighting from his first view over the ridge to the moment it disappeared lasted no more than 10 minutes. He found 4 indentations in the ground where the landing legs had been, scorched and smoldering brush where the flame had touched the earth, and a pattern of marks in the soil that investigators would spend days analyzing. He had not moved from that spot when his sergeant, Sam Chavez, arrived 4 minutes later. Chavez confirmed the physical evidence in his own statement. He did not question what Zamora had seen. He had no explanation for what he was looking at. Pause for just a second. I want to know what you think happened. Right now. Drop it in the comments. Was it psychological? A classified military test? Or something that we genuinely do not have a category for? I want to see what you think before we go any further. Because the records, they say something more interesting than any of those answers alone. It is 5:45 p.m. on April 24th, 1964. The desert is still. The kind of still that comes before something breaks it. Lonnie Zamora is sitting in his patrol car. The engine is idling. He has broken off a chase. He heard something, a roar that dropped in pitch the way nothing drops in pitch unless it is losing altitude. And he saw the flame, blue-orange, cone-shaped, angled downward into the gully to his southwest. He drives the car off the road. The terrain fights him. Loose rock, crumbling soil, the incline too steep the first time, the second time. The third attempt gets him to the top of the ridge. He cuts the engine, and then he sees it. Down in the Arroyo, 150 yards south of where he has stopped. An object, oval, white or very pale aluminum. It sits on legs, 4 of them, extending outward from the base. Its surface is smooth in a way that a car is not smooth, that a shed is not smooth. No rivets, no panels, no seams he can identify from this distance. It sits in the gully like something placed there, not something dropped, and beside it, 2 figures, small, white coveralls, standing close to the object. One of them turns and looks at him, and the look, the way Zamora describes it in his statement, is not fear. It is surprise. Zamora gets out of his car. He starts down the slope toward the object. He is thinking car crash. He is thinking injured people. He is reaching for that explanation the way trained officers always reach for the most rational thing first. Not because they are naive, but because they are disciplined. By the time he gets close enough to see the symbol on the surface of the craft, the figures are no longer visible. He does not know where they went. They were there, and then they were not. He stands approximately 50 feet away. He can see the marking on the object clearly from here. An arc like an inverted V, a horizontal line cutting through it near the base. A vertical element above, red, deliberate, not scratched or damaged, applied. Then the sound returns low at first, like pressure building, like a valve being opened. The flame appears again beneath the craft. The legs begin to retract. Slowly, impossibly slowly, for something generating that much sound, and then moves, horizontal, fast, gaining altitude as it goes southwest, following the contour of the terrain for a moment, before climbing and disappearing from view. Zamora does not fire his weapon. He does not approach the landing area until the craft is gone. What he does is stand there, in the desert, watching the direction it left, and then he calls it in. When Sergeant Sam Chavez arrived 4 minutes later, he found Zamora still at the site, shaken. Zamora was not a man who shook easily. Chavez would say later that was what told him. More than any physical evidence, the look on his officer's face. The indentations in the ground were there. The burned brush was there. The pattern of marks, pressed into the soil in a configuration matching the 4 landing legs, was there. And the local vegetation around the site had been disturbed in a radial pattern, consistent with something generating significant downward force. What was not there was any explanation. Here is where the Socorro case stops being a single officer's report and becomes something the investigators could not walk away from. The first corroborating account came within hours. A tourist couple, later identified through FBI records only as being from a neighboring state, reported to the Socorro police that same evening that they had seen a fast-moving craft low over the highway south of town, somewhere between 5:30 and 6 p.m. They described it as oval, moving fast and pale in color. They had said nothing earlier because they did not know anyone would believe them. They came forward when they heard on local radio that a police officer had filed a report. The second corroborating source was a Socorro resident who, from a different part of town, and without knowledge of Zamora's location, reported seeing an unusual airborne object moving southwest at low altitude at approximately 5:50 p.m. The direction matched exactly. Within 24 hours of the incident, the U.S. Army arrived at the site. Not to investigate a crime, not to assist local law enforcement with an accident. The Army personnel who came to that Arroyo took soil samples, made measurements of the ground indentations, and photographed the burned vegetation. They did not explain to the Socorro Police Department why they were there or what they were looking for. They left without sharing their findings. The FBI's involvement was equally quiet. Special Agent Burns filed his report, preserved and accessible today in the FBI's public digital vault, which confirmed the physical evidence at the scene, confirmed Zamora's account as consistent and credible, and noted that no conventional explanation had been identified for the indentations or the burn pattern. Then came Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official program for investigating unidentified aerial phenomena, which ran from 1952 until its closure in 1969, sent its scientific consultant, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, to Socorro within days of the incident. Hynek, who was at that time genuinely skeptical of most UFO reports, and had spent years debunking them on behalf of the Air Force, arrived expecting to close another file. He left with something different. In his personal notes from that investigation, Hynek wrote that the Socorro case was one of the most puzzling he had ever worked. He confirmed the physical evidence. He confirmed Zamora's credibility without reservation, and he noted that the symbol, the emblem on the craft's surface, had been described with a consistency and specificity that made fabrication extremely difficult to support as an explanation. The Socorro case was officially listed by Project Blue Book as unidentified. That designation was given to fewer than 6% of the thousands of cases Blue Book investigated. It means, in the language of federal documentation, that the investigators could not explain it. Not a hoax, not a misidentification, not a psychological event. Unidentified. So, 4 theories. Let us take them seriously. Stress-induced perceptual distortion is real and documented. Law enforcement officers in high-stress situations can experience sensory anomalies. The late afternoon desert light in New Mexico is unusual. Atmospheric haze, heat shimmer, unusual refraction patterns near the ground. It is not impossible to argue that Zamora saw something conventional and perceived it as unconventional. But this theory does not account for the physical evidence. The ground indentations were measured. The burned brush was confirmed. The soil samples were taken by the U.S. Army. A psychological event does not leave 4 rectangular marks pressed into soil to a depth of several inches. New Mexico in 1964 was not a quiet state when it came to experimental technology. White Sands Missile Range is roughly 90 miles southeast of Socorro. Holloman Air Force Base is in the same general region. The history of experimental aircraft testing in that corridor is extensive and well documented. Oval craft, unconventional propulsion experiments, early vertical takeoff prototypes. All of this was in development during that period. But a classified test vehicle does not typically land in a public gully in the middle of the afternoon, with figures visible outside it. Test programs minimize exposure. They do not park outside Socorro next to a highway at 5:45 p.m. The hoax theory requires Lonnie Zamora to have fabricated the entire encounter, created the physical evidence himself, convinced his sergeant to corroborate it, fooled an FBI field agent, fooled the U.S. Army survey team, and fooled Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a professional skeptic who made his career debunking exactly these kinds of reports. Zamora received no financial benefit from his account. He reportedly disliked the attention it brought him for the rest of his life. His colleagues never doubted his integrity. This is the one that tends to stay with people. The symbol Zamora drew that evening, and which he drew consistently across multiple interviews over many years, does not correspond to any known military or civilian aircraft marking from that period. It was specific enough that when investigators later deliberately circulated a slightly altered version of the symbol to test Zamora's memory, he corrected them immediately. He remembered exactly what he saw, and that consistency across years, across multiple interviews, under pressure, is what the psychological explanation struggles most to account for. None of these explanations fully accounts for what a trained law enforcement officer, corroborated by independent witnesses and multiple federal investigators, reported encountering in a desert gully on an ordinary Thursday afternoon in April 1964. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you, a document that was not made publicly available until decades after this incident, adds a detail that none of the other accounts contained, and it is the detail that changes the entire shape of this story. If this story has you thinking, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps. And then stay right here. In 1968, 4 years after the Socorro incident, a scientist named Dr. James E. McDonald, a senior atmospheric physicist at the University of Arizona and a member of the American Meteorological Society, conducted what remains one of the most thorough independent investigations of the Socorro case ever completed. His findings were submitted to the United States Congress as part of the Symposium on Unidentified Flying Objects in July 1968. McDonald was not a believer in the popular sense of that word. He was a scientist with an atmospheric physics background who became frustrated with what he described as the inadequate scientific rigor being applied to a genuine atmospheric and observational phenomenon. He investigated Socorro not because he wanted it to be real, but because the physical evidence demanded investigation. What McDonald found when he dug into the original case files, the FBI documents, the Project Blue Book records, the Army survey team's unpublished field notes, was something the public record had not fully reflected. The landing indentations, 4 of them, each approximately 4 inches wide and several inches deep, arranged in a precise geometric configuration. McDonald had the configuration analyzed. The spacing and geometry of the 4 marks were consistent with a landing structure designed to distribute weight across an oval or circular base. Consistently, precisely, not randomly the way an explosion scatters material or a vehicle accident leaves marks. Precisely, the way engineered landing gear presses into Earth. And then the emblem. McDonald discovered something in the Blue Book files that had not been publicly reported. After the Socorro incident, Air Force investigators specifically queried all known aerospace contractors, experimental aircraft programs, and government agencies about any craft matching Zamora's description, oval, smooth, on landing legs, with a red emblem on the surface. Every single query came back with the same answer. No known program, no known contractor, no known vehicle. The Air Force did not close the Socorro case because they solved it. They closed it with the designation unidentified because the alternative, leaving it open indefinitely, created its own set of problems for an agency that was under congressional pressure to manage public perception of the phenomenon. McDonald's congressional testimony in 1968 is a matter of public record. He called Socorro, in measured and precise scientific language, one of the most significant and inexplicable close-range observations of an unconventional aerial object ever documented in the United States. Lonnie Zamora, the Arroyo, the emblem on the surface, the figures who turned and looked at him. There is a note in McDonald's research files, held at the University of Arizona, where he writes of that symbol. He writes that it appeared to him, having interviewed Zamora multiple times over multiple years, that the officer's description of the emblem never varied by so much as the sentence ends there in the file. The next page is missing from the archive. Here is the thing about credibility. We tend to think that unusual experiences make witnesses less reliable, that the strangeness of what they describe is itself evidence against them. But consider what that standard actually means when applied to Lonnie Zamora. He was a professional observer, trained to notice things, trained to report them accurately, trained to distinguish between what he saw and what he inferred. That is what law enforcement does. That is the entire job. And by every measure, his colleagues and investigators used to evaluate him over more than a decade of questioning, over multiple interviews, over the full course of his career. He was exactly that. A reliable observer who saw something he could not explain, who reported it accurately, who never changed his story, who never profited from it, and who, by most accounts, wished for the rest of his life that he had simply gone the other direction. So here is the question I want to leave you with. Not a rhetorical one, a real one. If it was not Zamora's imagination, and it was not a hoax, and the United States Air Force could not identify it, and the Army took samples they never explained, and an atmospheric physicist testified before Congress that it was significant and inexplicable, then what is the thing that landed in that Arroyo on April 24th, 1964? And why did it have a symbol on it that no one has ever claimed? Lonnie Zamora retired from the Socorro Police Department in 1992. He moved to a quieter life. He did not write a book. He did not go on speaking tours. He did not seek the attention the incident had thrust upon him. He answered questions when he had to. And when he was done answering, he went home. He passed away in November 2009. He never changed a single detail of what he saw. Now I want to hear from you. 4 theories on the table. Which one do you believe? Or do you have a 5th one nobody has named yet? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Everyone. Let's actually talk about this. We set a goal of 10 likes today. Just 10. If we crossed it, that is you, driving this channel forward. And if we have not crossed it yet, this is the moment, right now, before you scroll away. Next time, a different continent, a different decade, and a mystery that a government spent 40 years refusing to acknowledge even existed. That one is already waiting for you. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you in the dark.